travelers, Saw-whet owls of Maryland. This picture, although you probably can't tell, but it was from a long time ago when I did my master's project. That was one of the first owls I got to release. It didn't fly off right away. It kind of worked its way up my arm and just kind of sat there looking at us, and we are like, you're supposed to fly away. I am presenting this representing the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. I'm a visiting scientist for the participatory, formerly known as citizen, science program. So this is all volunteer work for me at this point in time. So how is everybody doing tonight? It sounded like it's Must Learn Thursday. Everybody seemed pretty excited to be here. So I hope there's a lot of maybe ones and twos in terms of what you feel like on the Saw-whet scale tonight. Not so many threes and fours, but you can drop it in the chat. Tell me how you're feeling. These pictures are all courtesy of Carrie Wickstead. Some of you may know her. She's one of my colleagues, also helps with the Saw-whet banding station at SERC. And really, you can get just from these 4 pictures, get a sense of how different and each of the individuals are. And that's one of the reasons we are interested in studying this species. So how's everybody feeling? I can't see the chat, so this is challenging.
Oh, everybody's doing ones and twos and no threes or fours. Everybody. Oh, no, Hannah's 3.
Okay.
To be honest.
All right. All right. Thank you for your honesty. All right. So just a brief introduction. By day, I am Ranger Melissa, although I joke that I am more of an office ranger than a park ranger these days because I do work at the Maryland Department of Natural Resources headquarters building in Annapolis. I am the chief of interpretation for the Maryland Park Service. So I do work statewide with all of our state parks for my real job. And then I would say my fun volunteer work usually involves either butterflies or owls. And there's lots of folks around that when they can't remember my name will call me, the butterfly lady or the owl lady. So I actually did get the owl lady put on my name tag when I had my name tag made, just because even at SERC, the security guards, I don't think they actually know my name, but they're like, oh, the owl lady is here. And you might wonder what it means to say that I'm the owl lady. And Bronwyn, in my introduction, kind of alluded to that I started out doing work with barn owls in Southern Maryland when I was in undergrad at St. Mary's College. And it really did start with an ornithology class where we needed to do a little project. And I decided I would dissect some owl pellets from a barn owl nest box in Calvert County. And that has now kind of spun out of control. And honestly, sometimes my husband says, I thought owl season was just whatever season it was. I can find owls any month of the year now that I need to go help volunteer, research, learn about whatever. So in the fall, for me, it's saw-whet owls. In the spring, it's nesting barn owls. And lo and behold, last spring, I was on Poplar Island. I can share this all with you because it's been almost a year. And we literally stumbled upon a short-eared owl nest in the high marsh there. And Dave Brinker, who is one of my mentors, was like, you need to ban that now. And I'm like, I've never banded them. He's like, you need to ban them now. And then later told me that I am the only one to have banded short-eared owl chicks in Maryland ever. So even every year that goes by, there's new research and science to be done right here where we live, work, and play. So that's one of the neat things about studying these owls is that even though we know a lot, we don't know it all. So when you were talking about, how, bucket lists or those birding life lists, I kind of have a banding list of, can I band all the owls? I don't think I'll ever get all the owls, but anyway, I have banded these species in Maryland, which is cool. And I will say this all started back in college, and now I'll date myself a little bit, but back in 1998, I was putting up boxes in St. Mary's We put up many boxes on barns, but we also put some in marshes. And back in 2020, in the middle of COVID, when we were all kind of figuring out, it was June of 2020, I got a call about helping band a nest of barn owls down in southern Maryland with Andy Brown. And sure enough, that re-sparked my interest in the barn owl project, which is now part of the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership's Farmland Raptor Project. And lo and behold, we were trying to put up more boxes. And in 2020, I think it was 2020 as well, DNR got a call that there were barn owls nesting on someone's balcony in Crisfield. And as the barn owl flies, or as the bird flies, that's really close to one of the state parks, Janes Island State Park. And I worked with the rangers at Janes Island State Park to get a barn owl box, actually more than one, 3 or 4 barn owl boxes put up there. And lo and behold, the very next season, so if you start up here with 1998, 2020, 21, we've got a barn owl box up in the marsh. You can see the 2 rangers there with me, really happy, big smiles on our face. And then 2022, we have these little gremlins in our nest box. It was a successful year. They fledged, they were banded before they fledged. And then in 2023, the lower left here, we started putting some game cameras out on that box. So we got to see the next year's birds fledge. So I've gotten really involved with the Farmland Raptor project, and that's again totally a volunteer project. But barn owls are considered a species of concern in Maryland. Their populations have declined significantly. In the marshes, it definitely seems like, and the wetland areas, that habitat, as in nesting habitat, is what's lacking. Because why else would they be maybe sitting on a balcony and thinking that a plastic chair was a good nest site? But other parts of our state, it may be that food habitat is more what's lacking, that they don't have enough mice or rodents or small mammals to be able to support a nest. So still lots to learn, but we are doing lots of interesting things, trying to learn about barn owls and putting up nest boxes in suitable habitats. So if you want to talk about that, you can get in touch with me or Andy Brown there about the Farmland Raptor Project in Maryland. But I do want to say thank you to all my mentors, especially people like Dave Brinker and Steve Huey. And this leads into our Saw-whet talk, because I would have so much more sleep every fall if I had not met them and been bitten by that owl banding bug. So this on the right is Steve at the owl shed, and then Dave there. Many of you probably recognize him from all of his other bird related work with just every species under the sun, I think. So I really am happy that they were willing to take me in under their wing. And I have come to realize, especially in the last few years, that now I am starting to mentor other young people so that we can continue having new scientists join us. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through our presentation as well. So I'm not going to talk about this in great detail, but there are 8 species of owls that are found in Maryland. 4 of them are what I would consider to be resident species, and the other 4 are more or less just visitors. They may migrate through during certain times of the year. During my last presentation, though, I was told all but one of these species have nested in Maryland at some time. So that was really interesting to me. The snowy owl is the one that has never nested in Maryland, and I doubt we would ever have that. But the 4 that are our resident species are the barn owl, which is on the upper left here. They're found year round. The barred owl, Barred, which is right here under the M in Maryland. The screech owl, which is poking its head out of this hole right there. They use nest boxes, or will use nest boxes, cavity nesters. And then down here in the center bottom, the great horned owl. So those are our four resident species found here year round. And then the other four are what I would call our visitors. Here on the far right top corner is, of course, the snowy owl. And then under the snowy owl is the long-eared owl. And opposite side, lower corner, is the short-eared owl. You can see the distinct difference between the long ears and the short ears. And then last and certainly not least is the saw-whet owl, our smallest species in Maryland. So we're going to spend, excuse me, the rest of the time tonight talking mainly about the saw-whet owl. So I'm going to go through a little bit of history first. And someone had asked a little bit about their name. And so the common name saw-whet was once believed to be from their sound they make, and that resembled slightly a sharpening of a saw, the whetting, which is when you sharpen a saw. So possibly that's where their name came from. However, I feel like this other reason is a little bit more likely. So the French word chouette, and I'm probably not saying it very well because I don't speak French, but is a word used in France and French Canada, excuse me, to refer to any small owl. So more likely than not, our not being able to speak French made it sound like chouette was saw-whet, and then it's a small owl. So I think probably it was that, and that's how it got its name. But the Latin part of its name does refer to the territory where it was first discovered in North America, Acadius, which is now, it was called Acadia, and it is now Nova Scotia. So that's a little bit about the name. And this is, as we already talked about, Maryland's smallest owl species. I'm not going to go through the history because this is certainly just a timeline, and I will lose some of you if I go into great details. But I will tell you that before the 1900s, they were not considered a migratory species. They were irregular wanderers in search of food. So, sort of like what we said about snowies, that they were pushed south because there was no food. Although we're now finding that that's probably not why snowies are moving south. And again, probably we'll keep learning more about the saw-whets. But in 1907, Saunders published The Migration Disaster in Western Ontario, where 24 saw-whet owls all washed ashore after a big snowstorm. And then 1911, there were 4 records of migration in Taverner and Swale's publication. So again, we're starting to get a little bit of information. But I think 1966 here in Maryland is probably the most significant year when we start looking at this timeline, at least for me, because Jan Reese was at Kent Point and netted 29 saw-whet owls. And this was the largest number ever captured at one time in Maryland. And it was pretty much accidental. They weren't trying to catch saw-whets. So there was no lure. They basically left nets open and ended up with owls in them. So later, we start learning more about the weather and migration routes in the 60s and 70s. And then in the 80s, the lure was used, and that significantly increased captures. And that has been kind of the standard operating procedure since then. Oops, we're going forward. Here we go. So this, again, I know you probably can't read it, but this is just to show you it was published in Maryland BirdLife, which is was at least a quarterly publication for the Maryland Ornithological Society, June 1966. The unprecedented, 29 saw-whet owls, largest number captured at one time in Maryland. So Kent Point for me is actually just a very stone's throw across the bay from SERC, the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, where we now run our station. We are part of Project Owlnet, and this is a little bit out of date. We're working on getting a new graphic made up showing all of the stations. There are just many, many more stations than this on this map now. But what I want you to look at, though, is that most of the stations tend to be a little bit further south, whereas that dark green boreal forest, or even the lighter green, the mixed coniferous forest, those are where the saw-whet owls typically breed. They breed up north in Canada. And most of the places they breed, breeding bird surveys just don't cover. There are places where humans are not spending a lot of time. So it was a bit difficult to get a feel for their populations to know whether they were increasing, decreasing, or stable. And so the fall migration studies really are the main method for studying this particular species because of where they live. We do have a station as far south as Georgia. I met someone when I was at the World Owl Conference last fall in Oklahoma. And although they may only catch a very few number of owls, they have caught a saw-whet and basically put that state on the map for saw-whets being there. So it was a super big deal. It may not be high volume, but that one point is important data. So Project Owlnet just recently actually got some grant funding, and we're going to be doing a little bit more to update those maps, to bring things together. But it started in '94, and it began as a primary focus on saw-whet owls, and really that network, so that scientists are able to communicate, use standard methods, and also expand that network of banding stations across the US and into Canada as well. So here in Maryland, and this is another one that I really need to update, the first station started out in Garrett County in Western Maryland. And if anybody is not watching the most amazing sunset happening outside, take a peek out your window. It is super beautiful out right now. So this is about when we would be opening our nets if it was banding season. We open right around sunset to start our evening, but it is not banding season, and that's why I'm able to do a presentation for you. Our first station in Maryland was out in Garrett County, and that was right when Dave Brinker moved here to Maryland, and he moved here from Wisconsin and wanted to continue studying saw-whet owls as he had out there, and figured, well, if they'd be anywhere, they'd be up here in the mountains. So the first station was out in Garrett County. The next station was out on the shore at Assateague. And then Lamb's Knoll was established. It's right between it's right on the Appalachian, an old stretch of the Appalachian Trail between, I want to say, Frederick County and what's the next county over? Oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank. But Lamb's Knoll in the starting to get to Western Maryland. And then more recently, some stations here along the Chesapeake. When I worked at right after I finished my master's, I worked at Point Lookout State Park in St. Mary's County, Southern Maryland. And so I had asked Dave Brinker if I could start a station down there. And he said, you really want to do this? And I said, well, I live in the park. I work in the park. You know, it's a peninsula. We get some cool birds down here. And he's like, if you want to give it a try, sure. So we gave it a try. I actually ran for 5 years down there while I worked down there. And we caught birds and we had recaptures. It was pretty awesome. But I got married and moved up here to the Annapolis area. And I was looking for a place to volunteer with saw-whet owl banding. So I ended up going over to the Tuckahoe station across the Bay Bridge. Little far for me, but did that for a year. And then Foreman's Branch is part of the Washington College field station, I believe, and they still run, and they have a field station. They have college students working with them. Turkey Point no longer is running a station. There has been a station in Calvert County, and occasionally even Jug Bay has run a station on the western shore side of the bay. So the stations in Maryland, all of them do catch owls, but each site is unique. In the photo on the left, that is Lamb's Knoll. Every one of those little laundry bags has a saw-whet owl in it, waiting to be banded and quote unquote processed, which means measured, weighed, and that sort of thing. And the Brinkers, for as long as they can remember, have spent Thanksgiving at Assateague because nobody else would run the station on Thanksgiving. So he and his wife and kids always spent Thanksgiving at Assateague. Some trends from our Maryland station. So this was part of uh, my master's project. So that's why it ends at 2008. You might, uh, figure when I graduated now. But you'll see these trends and you might wonder, well, that's really interesting. Why do we see these peaks? It's a pretty classic predator prey relationship, but it really has to do with trees. And this one, I sometimes get a lot of questions when I say owls are made of trees, because everybody goes, owls are made of trees. What are you talking about? Owls eat rodents and mice and small mammals. And that's true. But what do those little critters eat? Well, they eat the seeds from these conifers. So every 4 years or so, this is Mother Nature. We know everything's not perfectly certain, but every 4 years or so, we get a big cone crop due to maybe it's weather, maybe it's nutrients, but we get a good cone crop on the spruce trees up in the coniferous forest. And then we get a big rodent explosion because there's a lot of seeds, a lot of food for the rodents. And then the next year, typically, we get a bunch of little owlets. So the female is well fed because there's plenty of food. She's able to lay more eggs if she is well fed. And then more of those eggs are, or sorry, more of those chicks are able to survive because they are well fed. So every 4 years or so, we get kind of a population boom because of all these owls. So every 4 years ago, or 4 years or so during the migration, we have some peaks. Hopefully, and again, I say it's nature, so we don't know for sure, but hopefully that's going to be what 2024 proves to be for us. We'll see. The banding season in Maryland, this is really interesting, is that Assateague's migration window is different than the migration window at Lamb's Knoll, which is the one on the Frederick County line going west. And it's even more significantly different than the Garrett County migration window. I feel like these windows have changed. When I was looking at data for my master's project, we were looking at 19 years of data from the 90s into the early 2000s, and now we have 20 more years of data that we could add to that and look at whether we're seeing changes. Typically, on those years where we have lots of little owlets, so to speak, hatchier birds coming south, the migration window starts a little earlier. Migration starts a little earlier, but is it starting earlier for other reasons as well? So why did we decide to establish a saw-whet owl banding station at Smithsonian Environmental Research Center? Well, it's a really nice large area, I think close to 3,000 acres now, if I'm not mistaken, of nice undeveloped land along the Chesapeake Bay, and much of it is forested. It is the western shore of the Chesapeake, and that migration route has been much less studied than the coastal area along the Atlantic and then the mountain range. Um, the other really neat thing about SERC is that it would be a volunteer opportunity and part of the citizen science program, now called the participatory science program. And of course, because of all the other stations in Maryland, there's a pretty high probability that we would have owls at SERC. And then for me personally, it was way too long of a commute to go to any of the other stations. So I needed to start my own station here in my community. So even though we put everything out, we got the nets, we got the lure, we got all those things, I wasn't sure if this was going to work. But sure enough, October 27th, 2017, that was our very first saw-whet owl captured at SERC. So it did work. And so when we catch an owl, what do we do? So we're catching an owl using mist nets. And I think this picture illustrates pretty well. They are super fine, almost like a hairnet, for lack of better terms, except not quite as stretchy. Um, Super fine nets that we string through the forest. Um, they're about 8 feet tall, and we have 5 nets total, and they have 4 pockets in them. They do have some stretch, and so when the owls are flying along, they hear the lure, the toot 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 sound I was describing, the wetting of the saw, so to speak, and that attracts them to our nets. If we just put the nets up, we wouldn't catch very many, but that lure attracts them to the nets, and then they get tangled in our net, and I remove them very carefully from the net. If you think of an owl flying, what is going to hit the net first? It's going to be their head. So their head is the deepest in the net. So you start with the feet. I joke that it's the opposite of head, shoulders, knees, and toes. You work from the toes on up. The head is the last thing you take out of the net. Taking the birds out of the net is, it does take the most skill. And it took me years to be able to learn, because sometimes you only catch a couple owls in a year, so you're a little rusty until that next season comes around. But you remove the owls from the net, and we also take weather data every night. There is a weather station at SERC, so if we needed to, we could use that data as well. But we look at where the owl was captured in the net, which net number, which deck number, which pocket, and which direction it was going. And we also look at what time it was trapped and what time it was released, and record all of that information. So we bring the owls to our station, which is the education building, the Reed Center at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center at SERC. And we use these little laundry bags. And the good thing is that now I can buy them on Amazon, because years ago, I had everybody I knew looking for these little lingerie bags at like the Dollar General and Walmart or wherever, because there were some that were like the perfect size and shape. And I would have to get people to, buy them for me. Now I know exactly what to buy from Amazon. We have a good stock of them, and we're good. But we transport the birds back to the building, our banding station, which is probably one of the nicest banding stations around, if I do say so myself. We have heat, we have internet, we have flushing toilets, many things that bird banders like to be able to have. And we set up our tools it's kind of the back breezeway hallway, because otherwise we'd have high ceilings to deal with. We do have to go into the janitor's closet to do take some of our data, because there are security lights that I can't turn off. But we are able to get it all done, which is the most important thing. So we are banding them. We are using a USGS aluminum band. It is a special size for saw-whet owls. It's called a 4 short. So it's specially made for the saw-whet owls. It is a almost like a cuff bracelet is the best way to describe it. It is not a lock-on band like eagles or ospreys or some of the hawks get. So it's pretty easy to get this band on. They have very feathery legs, so you just want to make sure it moves freely. And that band is their kind of friendship bracelet for science, is what we call that. Every one of them is a unique numbered band. And so if it gets recaptured, we're able to report that right to the bird banding website. And it's nice now because it's almost instantly, if the data has been turned in, that you'll get your information right back. So, some of the other measurements we take during the banding process, we weigh the birds, and the weight is actually what we use to determine whether it's a male or female. And that's because many owls actually, but saw-whet owls have what's called reverse sexual dimorphism. So that means that the females are actually about a third larger than the males. And that there's a couple different reasons for that, or at least hypotheses as why. But mainly it allows the males and females to feed on different sized prey. And overall, that makes prey availability in their territory larger because they're not eating the same things, exact same things at least. Um, so we do typically capture more females, and there's couple of different reasons why possibly we do. One is we're using a lure. We're using a sound that's been recorded. Everyone that is part of Project Owlnet uses that same sound. So there's not much interest in trying to change that up. We want to be consistent with our methodology, but that lure is the sound of a male, and it's a solicitation call. It's a spring call, a territory call for the male. So likely that's very attractive to the females, but not as attractive to the males. Other males might be actually scared off by it. So we're using that in the fall. Now, they shouldn't be making that call in the fall, but definitely during migration, it brings them into our nets. So that might be one reason why we capture the females more likely, because of the lure. The other is that maybe the females are more migratory than the males, that the males prefer to stay closer to those territories so that they're there when it's time to go back. They don't necessarily always come back to the same place to breed. They're a little bit nomadic in that sense. So, and they are cavity nesters. So if something should happen to that cavity, they'd have to find another one. And again, the females are typically 93 grams or greater. The males are typically 78 grams or less. Yes, there is a little bit of a gray area in that there. So those might be undetermined. Now they know whether they're a male or female. We just can't tell with our measurements. And Dave Brinker early on did do blood work to determine sex. And this is within 95%. So accurate. So it does work really well for us. And you'll see there, we do have to put the bird in a little orange juice can, a Donald Duck orange juice can, to be able to weigh them on there. The funny story is that I showed one of my first volunteers when I was setting up the station at Point Lookout, some pictures of me doing this at Lamb's Knoll, and he saw the Donald Duck orange juice can and said, well, I'll have to get you one of those. And he went on eBay and got me the Donald Duck orange juice can because you can't get that just anywhere. However, just about any 6-ounce can would have worked fine. Bird banders often use cans to kind of immobilize the bird for banding or weighing purposes. So bigger birds, it's a different size can, but the little orange juice can works for the saw-whet owl. And they're only in there for a very short period of time so that we can get their weight. We take a bill measurement. We look at the length of the bill. We also look at the color. It's either black or horned color. We take wing measurements. We take tail measurements. All these things we take, very, very quickly or as quickly as possible, just so that we don't keep the bird from its important, owl things that it is doing, such as migrating or eating. We look at the color of the eye, and we use actually a Benjamin Moore paint chip to look at that. And again, this is one of those somebody thought, had a hypothesis like, hey, do their eyes change color as they age? So some other hawks and owls ospreys, their eyes significantly change color from their hatchie or chick phase to their adult phase. So it wasn't a bad idea, but we really haven't found anything. We get all different eye colors, all different birds. And then we record the feather ages using molt cards. And I think this is probably the coolest part of owl banding. And now that it's called party science, participatory science, I joke that we were already doing it before it was cool, because we break out a black light, which you can buy online as a scorpion finding light or urine detection light for your cat, I guess. To look at the molt patterns. You can see this with the naked eye, but it's much easier to see under the black light because there is a feather pigment called porphyrin that glows under the black light, and that feather pigment is found in new feathers, and it fades in UV light. So as the feather ages, it fades. So new feathers that they've just molted or just grown in are going to be bright pink fuchsia under the light. So let's take a look. Hatchier birds all have the same age feathers. They all grew in at the same time. We don't get these cute little brown teddy bear looking saw-whets here in Maryland, but we do get lots of hatchier birds when we are banding. So these are the easy ones. Their feathers are all the same generation, same age, and they all glow under the black light. Second year birds, or SY birds, show kind of a window. We get pink on the tips and in the pits, but we have a window of old feathers that are kind of this just duller, maybe purplish color. But here, when you look at the lower photo, you can see the chocolatey brown versus the dark brown. The dark brown are the new feathers. They haven't faded yet. The chocolatey or brown are the ones that have faded, the older feathers. So second year birds, pretty easy for us to age as well. It gets a little more complicated as you get a little older. You'll see birds like this, where you're like, well, that's not a hatch year. It's not a second year. Not sure. What is that? So you could very easily say, well, it's an ASY after second year. Or you could even say after hatch year, because it's not a hatch year. But this also could be what we call a TY, a third year bird, because we can see old, new, and very old feathers on this bird. I did look up the oldest bird in the bird banding laboratory for saw-whet owls was almost 10 years old. My guess is most of them do not live that long. Like I was joking at the very beginning before everybody got on, these are like the chicken McNuggets of the owls. They are tiny. Everybody feeds on them. Lots of hazards during migration for a bird like this. So probably 5 is more typical of an average age, but certainly they could be older. And like I said, the banding records do show the oldest was 10. So this one, I'll give you a chance if you'd like to in the chat take a guess to see if you can determine what age you think this owl might be. Now this is not using the black light, but just looking at it from above and kind of looking at the feather colors. This is a pretty good picture because you can see a couple of different things going on there. Are there any guesses in the chat? And Lloyd, you don't get to guess because you know this one. You've seen this presentation a few times.
We got second. Someone, Richard said second, and Alice said third.
Oh, I think third is probably correct.
Riley said 2. Molly said second.
Okay. It's at least 2, but I think it's actually older than that because there's one feather. It has a little V out of the tip of it here. And I would call that a very old feather because the tip is broken off. So if we have new, old, and very old, that makes it a 3-year bird, a sorry, a TY, a third year bird. So that's one of, I would say the age determination is one of the most difficult things to do, especially late at night. The good thing is that we all carry cell phones around with us now with cameras on them, and we can document everything, even band
Hey,
numbers.
Melissa,
Yeah,
There's just a quick question, two questions just while we're on here.
sure.
Do the tail bands change color with age, and they're also, are the feathers molting?
So the tails, that's a good question. I don't think the colors change with age, but I might have to look into that. We don't look very closely at the tail to determine age. And what was that about the molting question?
I guess the question is they losing their feathers because of molts? It's a question mark.
Correct. Molting is the process of replacing feathers. And some birds, I'm trying to think what it is. Is it ducks or geese? When they molt, they're flightless. If a raptor like an owl did that, they would be flightless, and then they would be hungry and starving. So they don't molt all their feathers at once. So that's why we see these patterns. And other scientists, Pyle being one of them, have books, and we have the patterns of molt to help us with the aging. Did that make sense?
Yep, all good.
All right. So moving on. So we that's all the different types of data we collect. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the actual data. So we've been at SERC since 2017. So our seventh year just passed, and you'll see we've banded 140 birds, which is pretty awesome. Actually, that's not the correct number if I do the math, but we've captured 140 birds. So let's talk about each year and some of the highlights and lowlights. We'll stick to mostly highlights though. All right. So, I had an intern, Anna, help me because one of the questions I always get is what's the best night to come out and help you with owls? Like, I know that question really means is what's the best night for me to see an owl? And I don't have a good answer for that. But Anna, when she did her project, she was one of my interns, put together this with all of our data, and you can see, I think it's day 30, what is that, 307, 305, and 307 are good days. So you'd have to look at a calendar with the Julian date to tell me what day that is, but it's probably early November, maybe late October. But anyway, as we gather more data, this will be more of a bell-shaped curve, or should be more of a bell-shaped curve. But with only 6 years of data in there, that's what it ended up looking like. But everybody asked about that, so we looked at it and turned out pretty cool. Again, this is a participatory science program at SERC. The first few years, we had loads and loads of visitors and volunteers there. This little girl, Jenny, it was her birthday, and it was the best birthday ever. I had the river keeper, who, it was kind of funny because he's like, how do you know these birds are here? I'm on the river every day, and I have never seen one. And sure enough, we did catch one that night. We had the local AP biology teacher, my stepkids and their friends came out. We have lots of master naturalists, a homeschool family or two. So we had tons of people helping us at the very beginning when we did this. Now we're using a much smaller crew. We learned that there actually could be too many people, and now, especially with COVID, that we don't want to be so kind of crammed close together while doing our research. And it's probably a lot better for the owls to have fewer people as well. So in 2017, our very first year at SERC, we caught 8 owls. I will tell you, I was ecstatic. that we caught any owls that year. Because again, first year. But everybody else, and I mean everybody else, was complaining about how few owls there were in 2017 during Saw-whet migration. Assateague actually had their lowest season in 27 years with only 3 birds. Calvert County also really low. Tuckahoe and the Chester River 6 and 7. So in this area, the only person that, or the only site that caught more than us was Cape May, New Jersey. So we were like, maybe this isn't such a bad spot. Let's do this again. So even though 2017 was a low year, oh my goodness, then 2018 pops, and here we have an eruption year. We actually ran out of bags, and we had to use the little paper bags that I have as backup. I don't ever like using them. I feel like somehow these owls will become little superheroes and like punch their talons out of the paper bags and get out and all of our data will fly away. Luckily, we were able to do this 24 owls in one night, and 2 of those on this big night were foreign recaptures. And those are quite honestly like a winning lottery ticket. So this was our first recapture at SERC. It came from Vermont a couple of weeks before it came to SERC. It had been banded as a hatch year 2018 up in Vermont. So that was super cool. That was like a direct flight from Vermont down to Maryland for this little bird over a few weeks. We also captured a Jersey bird, but that one had been banded 2 years earlier. So that was it was 16, 17, 18. So it was actually a TY. It was hatched in 2016 and then banded by us. So that was, again, super cool. 2 foreign recaptures in our first or our second year at SERC on that big night. 2019, we're back down. We caught 6 saw-whets, but we had a really cool highlight. First screech owl I had ever banded. It was a red-faced screech owl. And what I have learned is that screech owls poop a lot more than saw-whet owls. I have rarely been pooped on by a saw-whet. Every screech owl we've had in our net, I've been pooped on, and man, do they stink like mad. Not cool. So we had a 6-pack of saw-whets in 2019. 2020 and 21 brought some new challenges. 2020, we were really fortunate that SERC did allow us to continue our research. We did have to, although the citizen science program was kind of on pause during that time, we were able to convince SERC that this is a long-term research project and that by not operating in 2020, it is a break in our data collection. And that would not be a good thing. So we were able to continue in 2020 with a very small team. All of us lived pretty close to SERC. We were in that kind of COVID isolation bubble. I will say for me, it was wonderful. I was working from home and could spend time at SERC doing owls without having a whole lot of scheduling conflicts. But we also had challenges in 2021 with the critters. We had bats in our nets, and bats will release themselves from the nets if they can by just chewing a hole in your net. We also had a deer run through our net and destroy the net. And that was over $100 worth of damage in just that amount of time. So 20 and 21, I would say, were some challenging times at our station. But that doesn't mean that we didn't have data. The really cool thing was that in 2020, we captured another Maryland owl, recaptured, I should say. It was banded originally in Garrett County. And the funny thing is, it looks like the bander and the recapture were by the same person because both Kevin Dodge and I are sub-permittees under Dave Brinker. So here, Kevin originally banded it up in Garrett County. We recaptured it over in Anne Arundel County. So as a hatch year, that bird was traveling the mountains. as a TY, a third year, it was traveling along the Chesapeake. So super interesting data that we get from these recaptures. So not only are we putting bands out there, we are able to get other bands, other birds that were banded somewhere else and learn about their migration pathways. But 2021 has to be one of my favorite stories. This is the bird that I call "Oh, the places you'll go" because of the places it had been. So we captured this bird on 11/9/21, and I put it right into the bird banding laboratory, and it said data not submitted yet. And sometimes that happens, but it usually means that bird had just been banded. So I put it on the listserv, the Project Owlnet listserv, and real quick get a response back from John Fedak saying, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I forgot to enter my data. It was banded in 2020, but I donated a kidney and I forgot." I was like, "Oh my goodness, that's the best reason to not have your data in." Like you hear a lot of like, "Oh, I forgot to do it," but okay, cool. But then Bob Dean, who was in West Virginia, says, "Wait, wait, wait! I just captured that bird 2 days ago." So in 2 nights, this bird traveled 92 miles southeast from West Virginia to Edgewater. So I think that's one of our only kind of 2 days, like 48 hours, and 92 miles. So I know I've told people this many times. I need to look back at the weather data that night. There was probably some really good northwest winds pushing her south that night. But yeah, so really cool data right there. And then 2022 was another super big year. Again, maybe not a lot of numbers in terms of like, oh, we got tons of birds, but the data we got from the ones we did catch is amazing. So this is our first true foreign recapture. This bird was originally banded in Canada, in Quebec. And right away, when we found this bird in our net, we were like, wait, 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 this band is different. Before I could even get my glasses to be able to read the numbers on it, it had a lock on band. And we were all like, this is different. But then it was in French. It wasn't in English because banded in Quebec. So this was our first Canadian recapture, or my first Canadian recapture ever, but the first one at SERC as well. So it was about 900 miles between our two stations. And she, of course, has traveled much further than that. But she was a 2020 hatch year bird. And what we think may have happened, because this was Tadoussac, which actually is a very big bird banding observatory station, is that we think they may have ran out of bands. You remember all the supply chain issues that happened after COVID or during COVID, during the pandemic. So we think perhaps there were some supply chain issues and that their bird banding laboratory ran out of the 4 short bands. And in your bird banding manual, you can use a 4 lock on. And that's what they had done. So there was nothing wrong with the band they used. It was just atypical for us. So again, really interesting data. It was banded in 2021 and was a second year. We captured it in 22 as a third year at TY. And this is one that I definitely wrote home about. In 2022, we actually had a grad student reach out to us about doing some grad work with us. And I said, certainly, come on down. She stayed on site for about a week. And she was looking at this encrypted sexual dimorphism in the plumage. So whether or not the owls themselves can kind of see using UV light each other differently than how we see as humans. So she had these 2 samples that are being held here. They were actually birds that came into a rehabber but unfortunately passed away. And so she looked at them using a reverse image to look at them as if they were under UV light. So really interesting. We were taking pictures of facial discs for her to learn more about this. And then sure enough, I find out that the Owl Research Institute is also looking at facial discs. I think that, and again, this is just a prediction. I'm a volunteer, but I think that AI soon enough is going to be able to help us, possibly in some of our animal studies. We already know that like whale tails and dolphin fins can be used to identify. So it's possible that these facial discs are unique enough, sort of like, a snowflake or a fingerprint, that we would be able to identify a bird. In 2023, I was fortunate enough to attend the World Owl Conference thanks to funding from Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, and then a donor helped me with some of my other travel expenses. But I will tell you, it was the most fabulous experience I have ever had. I did not present, I attended, but 16 different people, or I'm sorry, 120 different people, 16 different countries. And just so many different presentations on research going on. And it was really nice to see that there was a lot of students participating in the conference and more women contributing to this science. And I will say some of my highlights from the World Owl Conference. Number one was getting to hang out with Scott Wiedensaw one night and talk about Project Owlnet. Between he and Dave Brinker, they were some of the founders of it. And then also getting to meet Jennifer here, who wrote the book, What an Owl Knows. If you have the opportunity, read it. It's an awesome book. I got her to autograph it, and almost every scientist that was featured in it, that was at the conference, I had them sign my book as well. And then Marjan here is such an inspiration. She studies Eurasian eagle owls in Sweden, I believe it is, Norway or Sweden. And she does most of it from her hover round chair. And so in her presentation, she talked about how many flat tires she had, how many times the police were called on her, and how many times the police gave her a ride home. So it was just really, really great to hear people talking about their owl research, because there are some really interesting things that happen when you study, things at night. So 2023, our highlights. Well, there weren't a whole lot of owls. I will tell you that. I think we ended up with 9. And so if I put it all together, it looks kind of like the Brady Bunch with the 3x3 squares. But one thing I learned this year was how to play Wingspan, which is a fabulous bird game. Because all those net checks and passing the time, you have to find different things to do with yourself. So it wasn't a big season in 2023. Our fingers are crossed that 2024 is going to be another big year for us. Lots of hatch years, hopefully, moving south. You will hear about Saw-whet owls in the news occasionally now. And I think Rocky, or the Rockefeller Christmas tree in 2020, was probably the first time I saw or heard about owls in the news. But many of you probably heard about this too. It was that little saw-whet owl that was found in the Rockefeller Christmas tree. Luckily was able to be rehabbed and released. But there was a Rockefeller bobblehead. I had to get that. Some Rockefeller books came out. So this is all, really great news to put saw-whet owls kind of in the mainstream. But there's also some bad news, and that's that saw-whet owls, as well as many other of our migratory species, are during migration striking buildings, and billions of birds die every year from building strikes, and these, are preventable. So one thing we can do, is turning off our lights to help them have dark skies for migration. Luckily, many of the saw-whets do seem to survive window strikes, and I think part of that's because owls have such fluffy feathers, and they also have relatively short bills, beaks. Many of the birds that don't survive, things like woodpeckers, woodcocks, the beaks just impact their brain, and it's terrible. So thankfully, many of our saw-whets have been able to be rehabbed and released, but it was pretty amazing when I started seeing these on Facebook. Started really paying attention and seeing, oh my gosh, saw-whet owls here, one in Bethesda, three in New York City. Um, so again, places that we probably didn't think saw-whet owls would be, they're passing through cities to get to that better habitat, the forested habitat, because things are fragmented. They have to go through those cities, and unfortunately, those buildings sometimes are in their way, and they don't notice until it's way too late when they hit the building because of those bright lights. What is the future of migration tracking? Well, and this is being done in many places. MODIS, which is developed by Bird Studies Canada, but it means movement of life. The word MODIS refers to movement. And so these towers, these tracking stations, are put up, and then nano tags are put on birds or butterflies, and as they fly by the tracking station, it's kind of like your easy pass. They don't get, they don't have to pay, but it notes that they were there, and then we have the data about these birds. So this is what, um you know if I had a magic wand and I could wave it, we would be doing with more and more of our saw-whets to really figure out the mysteries of migration. There are MODIS towers across Maryland, not quite as many as Pennsylvania. If you're a bird in Pennsylvania and you're flying north south, you cannot go through the state without passing a MODIS tower, um, because they've put up a line of them basically east west, throughout the state for research like this. Maryland isn't quite the same yet, but we do have some. There are some towers up, and we are hopeful that in the coming years, this was something we started talking about, and then the pandemic hit. But trying to get a MODIS tower at SERC, they have lots of other towers already in place that we could possibly add an antenna to, and then getting the required training to be able to put the nano tags on the birds. You have to make a little harness out of, I just lost the name of it, but a special fabric thread, and then they're released. The transmitters themselves are rather pricey. I believe it's about $200 a transmitter. So in order to put out a lot of them, it would take some money. But I do know that there's some folks in Canada that are hoping this fall to put out a number of MODIS tags. And really, it probably is ideal to have someone at the top of the migration pathway, such as Canada, put them out, than us down kind of in the middle of it or lower part of it. But I think every transmitter that we would put on would help, because we banned so many birds. There are a few recoveries, obviously, but we've banded, over 100 birds in the last 7 years. So if we could get a few more transmitters out, that would be even more data for us. So I think the future is bright, and MODIS is likely in our future, but I don't think that those aluminum bands are going anywhere anytime soon either, because they are less expensive and don't require batteries. Lots of reasons to keep using the bands. And even if you do put a MODIS tracker on, you're going to ban the bird too. So that pretty much wraps it up. I am happy to take questions. I will put a plug that if you wish to support us in our research in any way, you can make a donation to SERC. Just make sure you put participatory science or Project Owlnet in the little box so that it does get to us to use for Project Owlnet. And as I said, I'm 100% a volunteer for SERC. I do not work for them at all. And I will take this screen down so that I can see you all.
Thank you so much, Melissa. yeah, unshare, and I'm going to put a spotlight on you now.
Sorry about that. And I
And
know I went a little long, but I tried to move fast towards the end there.
that's okay. That's okay. We have a couple of questions. A couple of questions early on was somebody mentioned uh, like when you're banding, cardinals can give you a very big pinch when you're handling them to band them. Do saw-whets bite when they're banded? Somebody else said that they look really tame. Are they tame? How do you hold them? So if you could talk about that for a second. And then
Sure.
did you mention banding babies in a nest? And if they do their legs widen or do their bands expand?
Okay, yeah, we can answer all those. So first off, the ones in the nest were the barn owls. So they're different species of owls, but we make sure that they're old enough that their legs are not going to grow any wider. So we make sure um, their legs are done growing essentially, because the bands, no, they're metal, they do not stretch. So that's great. Great question there. So the saw-whets are all adults; their legs are done growing. So that's true too. And then the first part of that question was about the saw-whets. You're more likely to get footed than bit, um, which means with their talons. So it really is. I don't wear gloves. A lot of people ask about that, but it's mainly because I need the dexterity in my fingers. If they were a bigger, stronger owl, certainly I'd be wearing gloves. But they're relatively small. That does not mean they're weak, but relatively small, and I need the dexterity in my hands. So just knowing where to hold them, how to hold them, and years of practice, to be quite honest. uh I have, been bit, and usually it's my fault. um is there any more
All
about
right.
that?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions about the banding season. So, Lynn K, what determines the banding season? And then we have Karen asking, at the banding stations, noticed any differences in timing of the high point because of climate change, or would it be too soon to see that?
Yeah, Karen, that's a good question. I feel like it is moving up, but again, I haven't looked at actual data. And the other thing is that I've moved from, I was at the banding station near Frederick. Now I'm in Southern Maryland. So, you know, or maybe, I don't know if Annapolis is Southern, but anyway, you know, I've moved stations. So I might be not comparing apples and oranges, or apples and apples. So, but yes, I think weather patterns are changing, and there have been times, we typically open mid-October and go to Thanksgiving. Now, I understand Thanksgiving is kind of a holiday that moves, and why do you do that? But it's mainly because hunting season opens right after Thanksgiving, and I'm not so worried about hunters, but I'm worried about deer. And once the deer get kind of riled up, they'll go right through our nets, and I just don't want to, have to replace nets. So typically migration season has, you know, kind of wrapped up by then. In our last few nights, like, we're not catching anything, but there have been some where Thanksgiving was kind of early in the month, and we caught a bird on our very last night open, and we probably could have continued into early December. But that's kind of a site specific thing. If you're not working um at a site that has hunting, or that doesn't affect you, you might be able to go into December. But it does seem like there are times where we don't catch anything until November, that those weeks in November or October are painful, because you're like, they should be migrating, where are they? And they just haven't, the cold fronts haven't come through to help push them. They do move because of food. I know a lot of people ask about that, like, why do birds migrate? It certainly is based on food availability, but I think a lot of it too is, these birds, the saw-whets, are not flapping. It's not a powered flight migration. They're using these winds. So if you don't have a strong wind that's pushing you south, you're just going to hang out where you are and try to find food for as long as you can.
Um, and then we have Kate and Riley said, are the rehabilitated owls banded before they're released if they are releasable?
Yes, most of the rehabbers do, either they have a banding license to be able to do that, or they work with a bird bander to make sure they are, because that's one of the things, we always like to, find out about and know more about.
And Jen asked, do you accept volunteers to help out with the banding? A couple people wanted to know about that.
Yes, you can look at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center SERC's webpage. It does say we are currently not accepting volunteers because it is not banding season. It is a small set of volunteers. Um, we do want you to have some kind of training. We've had master naturalists come out before, so I know somebody on here said they were a master naturalist. But we do have folks coming out. I especially like having young people, high school and college students come out, and giving them opportunities. So if you have a young person that you'd like to experience this, certainly reach out to us. We just can't have a large group of people. We can't have, like a whole 25 plus group come out. It's usually under 6 people now.
And this isn't the only participatory project at SERC or throughout the state, and there's some that you can even do from your home. We have done a lot of different programs on different. I know that it was called citizen science, and now then it was called I don't know,
Community,
community
and
science.
yeah,
Now,
we've changed our
now it's
names a few times.
participatory science, so it's all changing. But look on our YouTube channel because you can see some different projects you can get involved with as well. There's one that we just had recently about the looking for mud crabs and oysters that you can do as well.
Mm-hmm.
So so there's all kinds of different projects that you can get involved with because we just need more eyes, ears, and hands out there doing things.
And certainly keep watching this nest cam. I think it's so cool. I really want to get more nest cams in the area because it is a way for us to interact without disturbing too much uh the wildlife. It's kind of like that secret life of
And
the
Melissa, what
owls.
we had, I mean, and I would also encourage folks if they haven't already to use an app like iNaturalist or something like that. If they're seeing any saw-whet owls or owls, that they can make note of that because those are all data points that researchers are using. Do you want to speak to that any or?
Yeah, saw-whets are pretty elusive. In terms of, they're small, well camouflaged. They'll stay deep in the forest usually. They do like evergreens for that, cover. But there's always somebody on Christmas bird count that finds one, in the arborvitae in a like retirement community or something, kind of crazy. So I think what it is that it's not so much that they're rare. And, a lot of folks in the past would think that the saw-whets were rare. It's just that they have really great camouflage. They're not where we're at. They don't make a lot of noise during the non-breeding season, which is when they are typically down here in Maryland. So, yeah. But there's always somebody that'll find one, and it'll stick around for a while. And a lot of times you'll find it because you see the whitewash, like kind of dripping on that tree, and you're like, that shouldn't be there, and it's just a bunch of owl poo. Um, or maybe a little pile of pellets, you know, on the ground underneath of something. But they are small, so they don't they can be found in places where you might not find other owls. Like, screech owls are very used to living amongst humans. You can put up a screech owl box, so they'll live in your backyard almost.
And Lusher asked, do they congregate for breeding anywhere?
Not that I know of, in term like they're not so much like the snowies that have kind of like that. Yeah, I don't think they congregate, but they do breed in coniferous forests up in the Canadian areas that are pretty remote, and they are cavity nesters. So that's what I can tell you. I haven't done a whole lot of study on breeding on saw-whets, to be honest.
All right. Any more questions for Melissa this evening? And if you're interested in Wingspan, we do tutorials
Oh,
because
do you really?
there is a bit of a learning curve. It takes a long time to get up to speed. At least it did for me. So our next one is on Sunday, April 7th from 10 till 2. If you want to come out, if you play the game, you can play it. If you want to learn the game, we'll teach it to you. You can sign up an RSVP for that and come out to the museum because it's a fun game. We actually even had the creator of the game, Elizabeth Hargrave, who lives in Montgomery County, and she's a Marylander, and she's now the president of the DC Mycology Society over there.
Oh, wow.
She's done, yeah, she did a new game on Mariposa, so it's the migration of the monarchs, and we did a tutorial on that as well. So anyway, if y'all are interested, look online and come out and learn the game. But thank you, Melissa, so much
Cool.
for the
And
talk.
Tim did ask about the wildfires, and I am concerned about that. I will say, everybody last year did kind of wonder if that's why our numbers were down. This year will be the true kind of test to see if we don't get that kind of big spike we're expecting. So, um, I I I feel like they had to have had some effect, but I don't know for sure. Um, but yeah, that I did mean to bring that up. I saw a map. I think it was NOAA maybe or NASA put together of those Canadian wildfires, and I wanted to look at maybe seeing how that lined up with some of the forests and breeding. So yeah, that is a concern, and definitely, that's one of the things is these animals don't know our state lines, are they are world travelers and need habitat here, there, and everywhere. So thank you all. Thanks for all the kudos. And yeah, keep an eye on that nest box. I think it is so cool. And yes, their pantry is so well stocked right now. But there are five little outlets in there, according to the person who's managing that camera.
Well, thank you all for coming out tonight, and thank you, Melissa. Hope to see y'all next week when we learn all about the colonial nesting terns and building of the artificial islands and how that's impacted their populations. So stay well, stay curious, stay outside, and we'll see y'all soon. Take care. Bye bye.
I'll drop the cam in the chat again for whoever that was that just asked. I don't know if they got it or not. There's
Yeah,
the
it looks like they
cam.
got.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Yeah. Yeah, sorry about that. I know sometimes the chat doesn't catch up. So,
Yeah. All right.
all
All right. Good
right,
night.
thanks.